Yay.
Okay, recording is in progress. Everything is official now. Well, where do we begin? Harris, would you like to start us off as far as the specific topic of this room?
Yeah, you bet. I'll kind of recap a little bit by sharing the slide that I had up previously, but I will talk to that and give a bit of an intro on kind of what it is we're thinking for the discourse of this discussion. So hopefully you can see my screen now. Yeah, so in the past, we've certainly had the process of voting has been in and around Zoom rooms, having candidates sort of submit themselves and have an opportunity to sort of be reviewed by the community, which has been great. But we haven't had the opportunity to actually conduct a vote that would be sort of on chain. And so that's certainly a direction that we can support, sort of leveraging some existing systems that are there, which will give us the ability to be able to vote on chain, have a wider community have the opportunity to be able to cast votes that's not specifically focused in this particular time slot or in this particular time zone, by opening it up and having it run like a vote. So there's been a lot of discussion within the circle about, are we going to continue with the current roll seats? Are there other seats that we should consider? Perhaps a challenge team seat might be effective. What are the other seats that we might consider? Do we move to categories or some other specific area? So these are some things that we've thrown around. Should there be a different structure of the circle? And again, I definitely feel like there's been a lot of value that has come from the circle in terms of helping to identify issues and problems. And so, having functional areas allows Catalyst itself to run. There could be, again, more focus in specific areas. And so it's provided a lot of great value in the experiments that we've run so far. So we're really looking for your input to how should we change the experiment? What should we try next in terms of the support for this specific function of Catalyst Circle? Again, we definitely have seen a lot of great value in the subcircles that have formed. And so maybe some of the roles don't need this general election, maybe don't even need to be an idea scale as a function. Idea scale is certainly just one of the mechanisms we could use for voting. So it's pretty wide open in terms of how we would conduct it. And we can take this input and feedback and help conduct the next voting round for circle reps as we see fit. And of course, we have the other rooms where there is additional, things that are being discussed in terms of, the purpose of the circle and how that is potentially incentivized, those types of things. So with that, that's all the overview that I had to share. Quasar, I don't know if there's any more that you wanted to add, or if we open it to the community.
Yeah, I think we're ready to open it to the community. First, how's my sound quality?
It's a little choppy, but intermittent. It's coming in strong at sometimes.
Have you got a denoiser or something going on? Because I think it's modulating as you talk.
How about now?
Yep, that sounds
a little bit better.
A little bit better. Oh no, it comes in and out.
Okay, then I will do some technical rearranging here, but this room compared or when we look at it with the other room, the parameter changes. These are topics that I feel like are very similar. But for this room, do we want to focus strictly on the voting, or do we want to talk about more of the additional roles, reps, functional groups? What is the proper composition of the circle? It was designed originally to represent those that are in Catalyst, but as Catalyst matures, it becomes more of a Cardano governance
Awesome. Thanks, Quasar. And looks like Phil, you got a first comment.
In regards to representations on the circle and the concept of the circle rather than circles, I'm wondering if there's an ability to broaden, maybe not right away, but broaden the concept of representation in circles to form additional groups. So that there's various groups that are funded now that are kind of collection points for various community members or discussion issues within the community. So I wonder if those groups have the ability to, if they choose to participate, to put forward a representative of that group into a broader circle concept. So it might start off with 2 different circles and we can cross-pollinate those 2, but in the long run, how would we expand this so there's not just a single representative group, but rather groups of groups that are cross-communicating? That's kind of what I'm imagining could be possible. For example, we do already have like Catalyst United, which was sort of formed out of the PA working groups and subcircle stuff, and the funded proposal subgroups as well kind of have some structures forming. There's also the funded proposal that I'm on, which is the community governance oversight group. So there's kind of these groups that are congealing around issues or community activities. So I'd imagine that they could put forward a representative, but whether it sits on this formalized circle or whether we look to build structures that support additional forming of discussion groups and cross discussion.
Yeah, I'm happy to comment unless there's others that want to chime in on that. Allison, do you want to respond or do you want to? Okay, yeah, I'll sort of chime in then a little bit. So with respect to how the circle is formed and still, you know, there's a subcircle is still a circle. So it definitely can be fluid, right, in terms of how it behaves. And, you know, there's you know, definitely a lot to say in the concept of a holacracy, which is sort of a sort of self-forming groups that potentially may have individual seats that would then at least be in this sort of central circle at certain times. They could rotate in at other times. They could also pull in other people into that subcircle. So it's an interesting approach and an interesting concept. And it seems to be kind of some of the thoughts, but you know, we certainly don't want to contain it to just that. But I like kind of what you're suggesting, Phil, in terms of you know, trying to bring in additional groups and making it more fluid. So we probably would need some mechanism or something to sort of see who those groups are, what their status is, you know, how they're collecting representation, you know, and then that probably will tie into, you know, is this a volunteer position, or is everyone in these fluid circles going to be incentivized in some way? So there's, you know, we certainly want to have the opportunity for folks to be incentivized, but you know, if we have 100 people in a subcircle, you know, there may be some interesting effects there. So is there paid and then supporting? Is there, some of these things? So anyway.
So part of that concept would be that these groups are already supported by funding from the Catalyst already through funds. So therefore, in some way, they've been voted on by the community to form a group. So that's kind of the idea. Bringing that back to voting as we're talking about it. Look, this is beyond the scope of the current format, but there is groups that have already been supported by the greater community through somewhat elections through a funding mechanism. So in some ways they're mandated to exist as a group, and then I'm saying that those groups could in fact, if we choose, to be pre-allocated a seat on a circle, whether it's the circle or another circle or something, that's still in question. So that's kind of the thinking on how this relates back to the voting mechanism.
Nice. Yeah. And just to chime back a little bit, if it's open, some of the idea or the concept of using idea scale in the process is that a seat could become a challenge. That challenge could have an amount attached to it. And then there would be proposals for people that would be participating in that. And that could definitely be a mechanism of voting, just sort of like a normal process. There certainly are other options in terms of voting, in terms of running it like a referendum, like, okay, we've got a particular challenge, and here are the 5 people as a multiple choice to have a seat that would earn that amount. That is another way to do it, and those could be naturally proposed as challenges of sorts, right? So just using some of the existing structure, and we certainly could make improvements, to some of that as well, as a community. But cool. All right, I'll jump to Allison.
Thanks. And that's actually a perfect lead into the comment that I wanted to make, which was the point on voting in idea scale, which on the one hand, I think is really cool because, probably most of I was on the Circle version 2, and running an election is really, really hard. The way we've been doing it takes a lot of manpower, a lot of trusted people. We haven't been able to do it in multiple time zones or in a way that was convenient for a lot of people, but we had it was done really well. There was a high assurance of security and of one person, one vote. So pivoting to idea scale, I think, brings a lot of time zone flexibility. I think it broadens the process enormously while preserving anonymity, which I think is very important. I mean, I just wanted to say that really strongly. I think having an anonymous vote is crucial to the process. The downside to using idea scale the way we have it set up today is that then it's not one person, one vote, it's one ATA, one vote. And I think there are some philosophical questions that need to be discussed there, if it's appropriate to elect representatives the same way we fund proposals on the using the idea of weighted voting based on how much ATA you hold. To me, and I'm not a scholar in this area, but it's a little more problematic to elect representatives based on how much ATA you hold, as opposed to voting for projects that are going to further enhance the ecosystem. But yeah, I'll pause there and give back the floor.
Yeah, it's certainly a great concern, and probably something that does need to be researched more. I would agree. Anyone else have comments?
Yeah, I was gonna add to what Allison just said. Yeah, the well effect concern is there, right? Even for CC's elections. I actually, honestly, I like the idea. I am concerned about the well effect and one ATA, one vote. Maybe we can have perhaps like a term limit for circles, just like most elected officials. Maybe even, you know, I'm curious, how would it work if we have, so people are delegating to DREPs, supposedly starting next round. Maybe some of the DREPs can also be circles, right? Maybe combine like certain DREPs that have the most delegation. They can, but then it is based on data, right? We don't have the Sybil attack resistance infrastructure yet. We are trying to build it. I don't know, it is a F9 proposal, but maybe it's worth the experiment. It's much better than not voting, which we have right now, right? For a lot of the CC reps, and arguably idea scale is one of the most representative. Like, a lot of people engage, even though it's 10-15% of wallets that register to vote, a lot of wallets do vote, right? And maybe it's just by unique wallets, and not the total ADA amount. But at the same time, right, you do have the Sybil attack vector where people can just duplicate wallets, and yeah, those are my 2 comments.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, just to add a little color to that, we're talking and thinking about the concept of a referendum type vote. So if there wasn't any financial number attached to the challenge or attached to it as a normal proposal, this could be a special area that ends up in the voting app itself that just says, hey, here's a seat, here are the people, select one, right? And it's like a multiple choice. So that could be another approach where it removes that 1A to 1 vote, and it's just, I'm choosing A, B, or C. So that's another direction we can go, and it is something we're exploring as a means of getting the voice of the community involved in that. So just a concept we're tossing around. But anyway, yeah, Sebastian.
Yes, hello. Yeah, I mean, regarding the using Catalyst for voting on reps, I don't think it's a good idea, because already the token-based voting is creating or fostering a climate of a little bit of distrust, where projects that don't get funded or that get voted in, but they don't have enough of a score to get funded, they start having ideas that whales are against them, or there is a concentrated group of ADA holders that actually decide Catalyst, and the people with small amounts of ADA are just like token votes, right? So if we were to extend that system to the Catalyst representatives as well, I think that that atmosphere of distrust would even grow even larger. So I think we should explore other options that don't require token-based voting and not extend it to the representatives.
Great. Phil?
I've got a few points here. The 1 person, 1 vote concept doesn't necessarily work in idea scale either, because if it's completely anonymous, you could rig it with a bunch of idea scale accounts. So it doesn't solve that problem still. And maybe the problem can never really be solved unless there's some sort of trust token or something like that that's issued to the people who are going to vote. I'm not sure quite how that's ever going to work, because all systems of voting that I've thought about can be gamed by making multiples of whatever. So that definitely needs to be considered. We also have the issue of communicating the whole people in governance issue to the broader Cardano and ADA holder community, because if we all know that the CC was not supported in Fund 8 for its Fund 9 existence for whatever reason. So if we're going to go down the route of setting challenges in idea scale, would that be with a vote, or would that be mandated by IOG into existence? And if so, how do we show legitimacy of the process if that's the case? Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, I think it does. You know, potentially, you know, whoever's on the ballot could be determined in different ways. You know, so I do think there's a means to, you know, decide, hey, here are the people that we want to be on the ballot. There's certainly ways to introduce that. It could be done through the existing process. It could be, you know, done separately and just sort of inserted into the ballot. So there's a few mechanisms to kind of to handle it. We do absolutely want to bring legitimacy. So it's certainly a valid concern that, you know, how do we approach that? You know, for now it's a tool, and we just want to make use of it and really hear the voice of the community as much as possible.
and then I got one more point about the voter app. I think we've discussed previously that the fact the voter apps only, like, the data is still locked behind the IAG processes. So I mean, we could use that, but if it's going to take development time to get that up and running, I feel like it would be better working out what sort of protocols would exist, because there are a lot of people working on voting platforms in various formats. And it would be better to not lock that behind a single app and have that process maybe as a test process to be able to let other voting apps use a protocol that could, so that anyone could choose whatever voting app they used by choice, rather than, again, mandated by something. So yeah, that's kind of my thinking on that. It depends. If it can be quickly done, then it makes sense. But if it needs development time, then that time's better spent elsewhere, I think, to implement.
Great. Definitely some good discussion in the chat box here, but we'll continue to go with the hands for now. Dan.
Hi everyone, good stuff. Very happy that this is being talked about. So I would like to stir the pot a bit and ask the question: why do we model after broken systems and are working with things like representation and fixed seats and terms and things like this? And why do we use Web2 tools, specifically idea scale and email accounts, to facilitate the voting and the civil resistance? To me, this is somehow a bit, yeah, I don't know, besides the point. And maybe we should think about how we can make the circuits dynamic or fluid, as you said, and have them form in an ad hoc manner, in a sense that when there is a problem to be sensed, the community can decide we need a circle to discover a solution. And this circle then gets created for specifically sensing a problem properly and discovering a solution. And then after discovering the solution, gets dissolved again. Because if we have fixed circles and groups, we are bound to have, or we are more likely to have minority groups, and minority groups or minorities are always something we should avoid when trying to build an anti-fragile community. So that's the idea, not to have a fixed seat or representation or terms or anything, but just to have a process that can be triggered when certain criteria are met. And then once this process is finished, there is an end to it, and the group gets dissolved. This can also be supplemented with prediction markets, for example, where the elected or where the circle can actually put or bet on how likely they will see the solution discovered. And if they are successful, and people can bet against them, for example, and this would have also something at stake, and would maybe even cover the costs for the circle or for the circle operations itself. And also in regards to the voting, I don't get why we don't try using Hazelnet bot, as many communities, Web3 communities already do. It is very easy for us to create tokens and to distribute it to people in the community that we know are active, that have a stake address that is active, and they just receive one token, and they can register on a Discord server with this token, and then they are eligible to vote. And we can have weighted voting and all this kind of fancy stuff. It's already possible now. We don't need idea scale or complicated voting mechanisms that go over heavy Web2 infrastructure. And that's what I would love to see and would love to help with.
Thank you so much for that thoughtful statement, Dan. There's certainly a lot to unpack there. Yeah, absolutely. You know, if there's other tools, you know, and again, the roles, how we actually run the vote is an open question, right? You know, is there a seat, or maybe there's no seat? You know, maybe, you know, these sort of self-directed circles can form themselves, and there is no central circle at all. You know, certainly part of that. Yeah, I love the concept of fluidity for sure. Quasar, you want to jump in on any of it?
I did, yeah. Thank you very much. Harris, maybe you could share with us a little bit what IOG's parameters or mandates or requirements are for a circle, the roles, the vote. I think we're all here because of IOG, and we want to make sure that we're sticking close enough to the intended goals or outcomes of IOG.
Quasar, you're cutting in and out. Sorry.
Thank you. I'll come back.
Yeah, so certainly, you know, the intent was just to sort of bootstrap a process to listen to what's happening in the community, to sort of fix some of the functional roles of supporting Catalyst. You know, if there was issues or problems, you know, highlight that and then form proposals and address it. And really in a listening mode, it certainly makes a lot of sense. There is some notion that you know, a group outside of IOG would make decisions for Catalyst in the future. And so there was some experimentation with respect to, you know, possibly looking at the circle in that capacity, in that direction, potentially moving it toward a decision-making body. You know, so that's another potential purpose of the circle. But so that's kind of where some of that comes from. So there's no other alternate or, you know, mandate from IOG for what this becomes, other than we need decisions about Catalyst to be made outside of IOG. And so this can be self-organized, certainly are looking to your ideas in terms of how we think it's best to conduct that. And we certainly can, you know, continue to have a seat at the table, you know, whatever table that is. That's a circle, square table, rectangle.
What if it's just standing room only, kind of buffet style?
Yeah, general admission. Let's go.
And is my sound a little bit better?
It is, yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
All right. Yeah, if you want to continue on your statements, Quasar, or maybe we jump to Peter.
No, let's jump to Peter.
Right on.
All right, yeah. Thanks for your comments, Dan. And this is a great conversation. I wanted to circle back and just provide a quick brief background on how CCV2 and CCV3 elections were run, being that I helped integrally to coordinate those elections, and we ran them through Google Forms. Essentially, they were opened on the election day that was announced previously in town halls, and nominations were sent out 3 weeks to a month before that election date. And then the lists were compiled and put into a Google form on the day of. They were opened at the event, open for a specific set period of time, and then closed afterwards, and then announced in the days following. And yeah, I was the one with my finger on those forms. That's the single point of failure that we want to avoid going forward in circles in the future. And that's why there's this push for idea scale and other solutions. There's complexity with idea scale that I can see. I love the tools like Hazelnut bot and whatnot. I think those are really cool. I think it would be an interesting conversation to model what election event could look like with a tool like that, as well as see a model of how someone proposes an election event and process, like over what, a month and 6 weeks to 8 weeks, as you would prepare and then come into election with a window. And that was one other thing. You had to be at governance day to be able to vote. Allison mentioned this earlier, and that's what we would like the vote to be open for longer periods of time so more people can vote, because yeah, we had less than 100 votes on any of the positions from CCV2 and CCV3. So to decentralize that further in a secure way is why we need to upgrade, and why it's so important for CCV3 now to figure out how the election process for CCV4 is going to work, because the community has grown and it's time to evolve and upgrade this mechanism. That's all I have to say.
And that's fantastic. I don't know why I'm leaning towards my microphone that's unplugged, but yeah, we've grown and we've evolved, and this is just amazing. Like we've outgrown what we started with Catalyst Circle Human Sensor Array, and now's a chance for us to come together and see what a Catalyst community decision making would be and how we could do these votes. You know, this room is about votes, but I feel like it ties so strongly to parameter changes that we have to consider some of these things. It's a hard conversation to have in separate rooms.
Your mic is working better now, Quasar. Might as well go for it now.
Oh, I'm ready to go now. Let me get going. No, I love what Peter said. You know, we've grown, and that's a beautiful thing. And now we're, you know, we might be able to take the training wheels off if we all kind of agree on, you know, which path or roads or, you know, which side of the trail we're taking, the bunny trail or the medium, you know, no black diamonds yet, but let's try some stuff. And I don't know, I use bicycles and training wheels and snow skiing in one, but that's kind of how Catalyst is, right?
We're all inclusive.
Sosha or Sophie, I'd love for you to step in and say something.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I got some points I wanted to share. And I agree that we have grown and there's like new tools and things that are possible, but at the same time, I feel that it might also be good to even take a step back instead of a step forward. And go a little bit back to where the Catalyst Circle started. And I think because it, you know, it's something like that can just like evolve really quickly, and there's a lot of people coming in, figuring things out. But as I remember at the beginning, like one of the first tasks, how it started for the first iteration was mostly to exactly answer this question that is asked in this room: how do we improve the voting for the next version, and hand it over, right? Do nothing else but just that. And of course, it's really difficult to focus only on that. And I think the community also wanted it to be more, so we kind of just got ahead of ourselves, maybe a bit too much. yeah, there's great things happening in the community, but I think we might also like, I can also see that there's many groups building tools. Everybody wants their tool to be tried out, right? But how do we pick? Are we ready to pick one, or do we have the mechanisms to go back and forth? Are we locking us in? Maybe it's good to have the circle as a place where we, go back. The representative idea is nice, but it's difficult. Like people point out, we can't really have representatives because we don't know who is voting. So you don't know if CAs are voting for PAs and such. And that's difficult. So maybe just going back to a general circle with members from the community voted by everyone, maybe through ID scale or another system that IOG is working on. And then going back to that mission of like, how can we build with whatever is out there, shared from the community, some systems that are a bit better than how we started. And just make that the task and go sort of simple.
Do you mind if I follow on from that a bit? Does anyone else want to comment about that before
I object.
pick it up? Well, I'm going to do it anyway, Quasar. So I guess it comes down to the focus of the purpose of the circle. And if we want to change that, part of what Sophie's saying is totally what I feel, is that just because we're here today doesn't mean that the people building the tools and things should become the default in the future. So whatever we're doing, whatever tracks we're laying, we need to make sure that people can follow and change and adjust things in the future. We don't want to set things in hard concrete that say this decision was made today, it must stand. So part of the issue of choosing any one particular tool, for instance, idea scale, which we're currently using for proposal making, is that we get stuck with that tool. So part of the thinking that needs to be done now is what is the concept of the protocol. And this is kind of, I've made proposals in this space, and been thinking about this space, but a proposal needs structure, the circle needs structure, and we've got the Cardano protocol, which is a protocol, right? And then we all build upon it. So whatever voting thing we do, I think needs to be at a protocol level so that anyone who possibly wants to participate in the future, build a better tool, promote it better, build a community around something else that's new and innovative, that's completely different from what's already in existence, needs to be able to be done without permission, without convening a meeting, without discussing with IOG. The participation is super important, and the openness of that, which means that anything we choose to do now, like the original circle, the progression of that is building a protocol that could be used and adjusted and voted on in its own ways. And that comes down to the ADA holder in some way. Of course, it gets complicated once you start digging into identities and things like that. So it's not too difficult to create a voting structure based on wallet, but that's still, it's not one wallet per person still. So the one vote per person is a super tricky problem, and still probably won't be solved, and maybe doesn't need to be solved at this stage, but the thinking needs to be laid down so that can happen.
That's great. Thanks, Phil. Harsha?
Hi. So since like the circle reps position is like an incentivized position, I also think the reps need to like put forward an impact report that each of them has. And based on that, I think the community can vote on whether that position needs to be refilled or the same person can continue, so that we know that people who have created impact can keep doing what they're doing.
I love that. Thanks for that feedback.
I wanted to add about sort of subcircles or groups, or how we get to that point of different systems, which is also an interesting topic. Where I think like we have that freedom, right? We can just start like organizing ourselves and building communities and building the tools. Like we don't need anyone's permission. And if they're good tools, people will join, right? And I think that sort of the connection with the circle, it's good to go then sort of see that as the top layer of Catalyst, but to work towards it and not from there, because that has the risk of a lot of sort of decisions that are varying between the implicit and explicit, like creating subcircles. It happens sort of on the decision, wasn't really voted in or something like that, but then it might stay for a while, and you get sort of things that become explicit through an implicit route. Whereas if we're all building from the ground up, then we kind of, then you have the sensor array looking at everything, kind of just pointing people at like, hey, you can go there or you could go there. It's more, than just sensing from the top instead of building from the top.
I think we've got a mini Quasar. Awesome. Allison.
Down to
Yes.
business.
So both a philosophical and a practical question here. The practical question is, so, I mean, what's going to happen with all these feedback and these thoughts and these ideas? And the philosophical question is it possible to build decentralized governance in a decentralized way? I mean, what's the mechanism for how these questions are going to be answered? Because, we can talk about it and we should. And I think there are a lot of brilliant people here with good insights and good thoughts and perspectives, but ultimately somehow a decision has to be made and there has to be a path to move forward, and there should be at the end of this all an election. And I mean, I guess, Harris, I'm asking you because IOG has historically more or less been responsible for either running it or giving it the seal of approval since the circle began. But what, and maybe that's one of the questions you were asking us, what's the mechanism for finalizing the decision about what happens next?
Yeah, sure. I would suggest, once we have a significant amount of data, right, we can collate that data and sort of sift through that as sort of a volunteer circle that exists now, and work towards, reading that back to the community, saying, hey, we've got feedback. This is what we'd like to see in terms of the seats, how, the function of an election. We need to decide what are we electing, right? Does every seat need an actual to be represented in an election or not, right? So having that data is going to inform us, to deliberate a bit more about it, and then we can then put forth maybe a proposal of how we would approach it, again with feedback from the community, ideally, right? So that would be a means of doing it. We could also take that information and sort of just decide as a functioning circle that exists, okay, based on that feedback, we can move forward in this way in defining how the next election will be run. So there's a few different ways we could approach it. So that's some of my initial thoughts, Allison, but yeah, if you have any more questions.
I mean, it's a tricky problem, because what's the mechanism for decentralized community decision making to happen? And And I think trying to answer the questions that you started with and that we need to answer. I mean, just taking the simple, which rep should be elected. I mean, I think there's a whole conversation there. You know, what are tool makers and maintainers? Do D-reps need a seat? Should Emergo have a seat? Should the CF have a seat? I mean, those are all really good questions, and we could spend an hour discussing each and every one of them. And I think they're critical questions for the legitimacy of the circle. But at the end of the day, someone has to decide. And what's the mechanism for how that decision gets made?
Yeah, it's certainly an objective is to try to bring legitimacy, and with the voices from the community, you know, the goal is to bring some legitimacy that says people are thinking in this direction for now, right? And then the circle could make that decision just to bootstrap the next experiment, right? Because again, which is just another iteration of the experiment, and trying to refine ways to do that. And so we certainly can leverage the circle's capabilities to sort of decide what that next election is. But yeah, the goal is to continue to experiment, and it could be go back to the original state, which you know, definitely came into question the legitimacy of that purpose, right? Of just listening, and a lot of questions about what does the circle do, you know, which is being handled sort of in the other chats. But you know, so we want to bring legitimacy. We want to hear what the community thinks about it, and then ultimately the circle could decide an approach based on data, not just, you know, 7 people talking. Cool. Thank you, Allison. Quasar, you want to run with the next ones?
Well, yeah, I'd like to say that I very much agree with a lot of the points that Allison brought up. I think it's important for us to not rush into making decisions, but actually exploring the community, exploring one another, exploring these groups, and with a focus of finding the right way to vote, but not making a decision at this time. I think there's a lot of conversations going on in the community, the broader Cardano community, the Catalyst community, about what's next. Yeah, I'm talking in there. You should. He's my Twitter Space host right now. He's listening to us on Twitter. So
Awesome.
Yeah, pretty cool. Let's find a way to go back and explore what Circle was intended to do, not the human sensor array. I'd love to get rid of that specific conversation, but be more of this community sensing body, and that being also sensing from IOG what's being asked, what's being delivered and stated, and work towards finding voting options for voting communities and additional participants. You know, Catalyst Circle began with the 4/5 functional groups, but I dare think there aren't more groups that either want to be more functioning in Catalyst or are looking to be more involved. There's a lot of people, you know, a lot of willpower, and I will get the other computer in just 1 second. Yeah, I think that's really it. You know, I don't feel like there needs to be a decision made other than the decision to start exploring options. And I'll leave it at that for now and step away.
Cool. Thanks, Quasar. Sebastian.
Yeah, well, first thing I wanted to say that I don't think we should frame these questions in the idea they are philosophical. I think they are political questions. Every time we are talking about legitimacy or what are the limits of power of certain institutions or groups, I think those are political questions and should be framed like that. Additionally, I wanted to ask, regardless if we go via expanding Catalyst to vote for project, for representatives or any other system, where the resources to do that change would come from? Would that be from IOG or from the Catalyst budget or the developer time, all of that stuff? Where is it going to come from?
Those are the resources for what? I missed the question.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to extend voting to the representatives or do any of these changes, the resources to do these things, the developers, the money to pay the developers, all that stuff, where's that gonna come from?
Sure. I mean, we certainly, if we keep in the idea scale framework, we certainly can facilitate some of that relatively in a straightforward way if we decide that's the direction to go. If there's other pieces that need to be worked on or built leveraging a different tool, that could be handled by a circle seat with subcircle people, and there could be resources from a few different places. But certainly just to bootstrap the next circle, IOG can participate in that. But ultimately, we are looking for alternatives of ways to do that. So, today's discussion is to kind of define some of what those seats are, what needs to be elected, what doesn't need to be elected, the trend of fluidity, functional reps, this has sort of come into the discussion. So is there a need for voting? I would presume yes, but what seats? Is it 7? Is it 15? Is it 2? So these are some of the questions. But on bringing a circle, that is voted in with more voices, and a process that spawns from the voices of the community, and that's kind of the intent. But I do like that separation of political questions and functional questions, for sure. So thanks for that comment, Sebastian. Steve.
Hi, Harris, everybody. I was sitting in the other meeting that Felix is hosting, the other breakout room, and then I came in here and I'm kind of, for me, I mean, Charles dropped a bomb last week. Right? And, like we're having all this talk about the circle, and I'm trying to juggle all these different thoughts in my head, right? Like Charles described a foundation where you could work your way in or buy your way into it. And he said that in the same 27-minute span where he described this future governance structure as being bicameral. And yet there's idea scale and there's circle that's kind of grown. The idea of circle has grown out of idea scale. And I'm starting to me, it feels tricameral, right? Because there's always the technical SIP process, and that's separate. And that should be separate in my opinion. But we got a bunch of rich dudes who bought their way in, or who have been in Cardano from the beginning and have therefore worked their way into that body. That does not describe most of the people involved in Catalyst, right? And so how is that accounted for in this label of bicameral? And I've got more questions than I hear answers, and that may be the way it's supposed to be. But on this level, when we talk about all of these moving parts, like to me, we have now, and we will have even more in the future, a lot of issues in the broader Cardano ecosystem. That circle can be the people that have issues out in that larger ecosystem. They can go to the circle, and out of that, then I can imagine that the circle gets much larger than it is now, just to follow up on these issues, right? There may be some times where you need hardcore investigators to investigate certain situations. You may need to tap into some real expertise to deal with some issues and bring those issues to the, the other two chambers, or the two chambers, there's a lot of vagueness in there. And I really found Charles' video pretty interesting, pretty exciting. And yet, I go and I look at the Linux Foundation structure, and I see the same names I see on the Fortune 500. I'm not quite sure how to meld all these things together and not feel like we have the same old that runs on the blockchain. You know, I don't know how we avoid that based on what I've heard so far. So it's nice to have this discussion about Circle, because I think it's been really busy, and yet we don't really know what's happened so far. And I would like to see, you know, I would like to feel like the community feels like the Circle is worthwhile, and I think they're still scratching their heads about it.
Sure, definitely fair. You know, thanks, Steve. Yeah, the definitely the video from Charles is certainly enlightening. It's certainly a reference. It is anchoring a bit in the direction of the protocol side of things, for sure, and you know, the actual Cardano protocol. You know, Catalyst really is targeted towards an innovation fund and spurring innovation for people with great ideas in all parts of the world. And there is going to be a continual need to have oversight, to make certain decisions about parameters and other things in an entity that's outside of IO, because IO wants to hand this off to someone else that can help to bring the treasury funds into the hands of great ideas. And you know, so that's why the Catalyst Circle is really bound within the framework of innovation and ferreting innovation funds, which we have an amazing community and will continue to be able to participate, you know, potentially as part of that bicameral suggestion that Charles made, and you know, have a voice in everything Cardano, right? But the purpose of the Circle was really intended to focus on the process of Catalyst and bringing funds to the right people for the right reasons, making good decisions, and you know, supporting the framework that has been established for what Catalyst is and how those decisions are made.
Well, I can appreciate that, because I mean, like, my initial perspective hasn't really changed. Is, you know, that Catalyst is the way for the community to invest in itself, right? You know, and that's great. But there has been the whole 2 years now that I've been aware of it, that undercurrent that this is also governance, and yet it doesn't sound like Catalyst is going to be the governance vehicle. Something else is, and then that's the question of like, how do you express your voice in the actual governance body? So, and I'm, you know, I accept that that's probably TBD, you know, to be determined. But you know, these are real questions, given the curveballs Charles throws once or twice a year.
Absolutely. I appreciate your thoughts, Steve. Cool. Allison.
Thanks.
Well, yeah, actually, I was going to more or less make the comment that you made, Harris, that, or maybe to ask for clarification. When Charles was talking about the bicameral model and governance, he was talking about governance of the whole protocol. And the Catalyst Circle is focused on Catalyst parameters, not broader Cardano parameters, I think. So then the question is, to the point, I forget if it was Steve or you, Harris, just made, that Catalyst is a governance experiment. So do we have any sense around how the governance experimenting that we're doing in Catalyst might influence the Cardano protocol governance? And maybe that's not a fair question, because I'm getting way off topic from what you had, the original questions you'd posed. But I think it's important to remember that what we're doing here in Catalyst is a governance experiment that could have broader ramifications.
Yeah, it absolutely can inform sort of that future state and overall protocol. Absolutely. I think one of the big benefits is that we have seen the emergence of very active people within Catalyst, and that's a huge value, you know, to future decisions, DREPs, you know, directions that we're going to take governance as a whole. So I think there's certainly lessons that will be applied, you know, in the future state as well. And you know, that's, yeah, I apologize if I'm being a little bit vague, but there's definitely some more announcements around the corner that will make this a little bit clearer, but definitely some great signals from Charles of what that future direction looks like. Cool. Yeah. Nin?
Is it my turn already? Wow. I can share just my understanding from what Charles shared. I don't think they're going to be shutting down, Catalyst anytime soon. I think it's like one of the most successful products on Cardano. Just look at the community that we built. You guys have built. Really, I get to benefit as a community member and be part of it. I do know that the open source fund, right, where IOHK and Cardano needs more devs to enter the ecosystem, and therefore there's been like a gold partnership with the Linux Foundation, and also for successfully funded projects and companies and so on that are building on top of Cardano to provide them additional resources, right? That's the open source fund, and ways to get involved in actually building the infrastructure of Cardano, getting more developers in and benefit the whole ecosystem, and not have to compete with community projects or younger projects that are designed to grow on Catalyst. That's my understanding, right, from what I've heard from Johnny and other people at IO, the amazing people I have met at Consensus. So I don't think that's like I'd say the future is bright, more brighter than it is not, right? And I'm personally really excited for the announcements. So just to share what I know, of course, it is not complete. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Maybe we can try to get back to sort of the focus of the discussion for this after town hall. Certainly a relevant discussion, of course, but so yeah, Phil, did you have any additional thoughts in that regard?
I guess before I say anything else, I'd rather just see if anyone else who hasn't spoken, I'd like to open up the floor to let people, to offer the invite to put your hand up and have a say here, because that's what we're here for. So I might just be quiet for a little bit and see if anyone else who hasn't said anything would like to add to the conversation.
Darlington, he was talking specifically to you.
I'm just a fly on the wall, writing some code.
I object.
I am curious to get to the next steps part. So as far as what happens after this meeting, I think Allison said something about that.
Great.
Anyone else? It's a lot of people here, so maybe. Okay.
Yeah. For those that don't want to speak, please add a comment in the chat. I did post a Google Doc that you're more than welcome to take a look at or add questions. I hope that this is a conversation we're having for the next several months, if not the rest of the year. I feel like it's a big one. Like what Steve mentioned, things happening in September-ish, with Charles, the roadmap governance, there's going to be some things changing, but we have to be a little bit fluid and prepare for some of these things. So with that, Phil, please go right ahead.
Yeah, so I've got 2 points. We've discussed many things about parameters in Catalyst, and Alison mentioned this, that maybe the circle is meant to be looking at how we can explore and define parameters based on community input. And then that brings up the idea that the circle needs the parameters defined. So it could be work of the circle to define what a circle parameter is and what they are, so that we can work on how to set them and change them. So what's a circle member? That would have a parameter. How they're elected might not even be set by the circle then, but set by the interest groups that are submitting people to the circle. These types of things are probably discussions to be brought up in the circle and then brought out into the wider community. I see Darlington nodding his head maybe about this, and other people. So with those parameters, then the community can start to understand the thinking, can see holes in where parameters should exist where they currently don't, and then work out ways to set them. Because without these, we're kind of still just plodding along in the darkness. So these are kind of the light posts that we can work to adjust in the future. So on that, with the work that's been done, I mean, we've developed a wallet-based voting mechanism. Other people are working on them. So there could be a vote, like if we're discussing voting mechanisms, people could stake to a certain stake pool that would give voting power, and then other people could vote and create voting apps that would use that mechanism. So in that way, the process could be opened up. It doesn't solve that problem of one vote, one person. But I don't think anything solves that unless the use of the identity token or DID system is put in place. So the only solution to that is that, from what I can see. So IdeaScale doesn't solve that. The current Google form doesn't solve that. So if we were looking to an iterative process to vote on chain, I think that process could be implemented and therefore be used by multiple voting apps in the future. So that would be a mechanism that I think we could work towards making exist.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. Anyone else want to respond to that? Okay. Yeah, Allison.
Yeah, and I agree with Phil. I just wanted to ask a clarifying question. When we're talking about which groups would be voted via IdeaScale, and with what Phil was just saying, do we mean, are we talking about voting based on number of ADA? Are we talking about one IdeaScale account, one vote? Or are we debating how that would work?
So I have a reasonable understanding of the options within IdeaScale. I believe it could be one account, one vote, depending. I think that would be the case if we went with sort of a referendum type vote, because it's like pick one of these three options, right? And you know that would be cast, and certainly leveraging sort of the blockchain in terms of recording the vote that comes out of that, because there's different vote plans that can be applied to the on-chain voting mechanism. So these are definitely some of the tools that we have available that we can implement. So some of the question is there's a few different approaches we could take, using sort of a standard challenge and proposal, right, where a seat is a challenge and a proposal is a person, right? But then that lends the question that everyone's sort of discussing, which is, okay, well, now it's 1 ADA, 1 vote, and how does that impact it? So that, certainly a valid point. So, there could be other ways around it that we can certainly investigate and bring as part of that solution. But what we're trying to pull together is, how are we going to conduct the election? And so this is theoretically the role of the circle, is to define the CCV4 election process. So we've been talking about it, and then there's certainly been this further discussion about subcircles, the definition of that? How do those subcircles get formed? Is there anyone voted in from the subcircle? Is there one role that actually has a formal seat and everyone else is pulled into it? Or are they just sort of self-organizing? All right, so there's a number of ways that we could sort of take it.
Well,
yeah.
I would say, my 2 cents here, one of the principles of experimentation is that you minimize the number of variables you're changing so you can measure specifically the result that came from changing the variable. So it might make sense to not change the entire composition of the circle and the voting mechanism all for CCV4. So maybe there's an argument to be made that you keep the composition of the circle exactly the same and change only the voting mechanism and see what that produces. And because it would be a pretty big change to go from the one person, one vote run by CC admin team and friends to voting in idea scale, either on the basis of an idea scale account or ADA, and also changing which reps were being voted all at the same time. That would be an awful lot, both to get accomplished logistically and to try to measure the impact of what those changes meant.
Great point. I definitely support a scientific approach and change a variable at a time. It's certainly very valid and something that we should consider. Absolutely. Yeah, and again, I think the point of this discussion is to try to see how the community feels about these elements, changes, ideas the community has in terms of an approach that the circle might take and the decision on how we elect CCV4 members. Cool.
I
Then
just have a short idea. Someone mentioned how hard it would be to, not me, but different community member, how hard would it be to add like fingerprint or some biometric authentication to the voting app?
that's about
I do not, technically, I don't think that fully solves like, wallet duplication, but we do have 10 fingers and 10 toes. Right? We can probably create more than that. Anyways, and how many devices would you have, right?
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
That's,
certainly, yeah.
Sorry, Harris. That would like go against any of the virtual devices, right? I don't know how hard it would be to spoof that. It was just ideas from the community.
That was great. Yeah, it's certainly a tough nut to crack in terms of one person, one vote. I love the idea of leveraging DIDs, and it's certainly something that Tony and I have been talking about and trying to find ways to make it work. For sure, definitely inspired by sort of some of your talks, Allison, in that regards. And so, it's certainly something we're noodling on pretty heavily and would love to see implemented, as part of governance at some point in the near future when it's ready for prime time. So for sure. Yeah, go Atala. There we go. Cool. Yeah, Harsha.
So I just wanted to bring up a discussion on why we think one person, one vote is the way to go, because I like the idea of it, but we would also be opening ourselves up to attacks, because blockchain tribalism is a real thing. So anyone can come and attack our system. So I'm just curious as to why we have already agreed that one person, one vote is the best way to go.
Yeah, I don't know if we've completely made that distinction. It's certainly an approach that requires further research. So we're not in a place where we've made that decision, but the technology could facilitate something different than one ADA, one vote, which has its also its share of problems. And so it's sort of balancing what is the best, and potentially, this could be something that, could be a little more fluid, where, this particular vote is using this formula and this particular vote's using this formula. So there could be that flexibility that, you know, can be available depending on the voting system, for sure. So yeah, we certainly love the merits of quadratic and all kinds of other systems. And so, yeah, but we just need to sort of pick the right way for the right place and reason. So yeah, it's great. All right, I probably will, I love the discussion. We'll keep it going, but maybe stop at the top of the hour if that's reasonable. We've been going for a little while. No, I can certainly go a bit longer for sure, but cool. Yeah, Darlington.
The QA DAO is recording this. Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if there needs to be a concerted effort to broadcast and publish that, and maybe attach a form for more feedback to the QA DAO publication. It won't be a dialogue, but I think in the top of the count in this room was like 30, right? I think there's more than 30 people in the space. So, maybe we plan on running these rooms for a while, for a few more town halls to get other participation.
So my understanding is that we're also on Twitter Space right now. So I think Quasar might be broadcasting.
So is the venue is there a thing, Quasar, that people can be directed to give feedback on this? There you go.
Yeah. So
I get that it's streaming right now. I'm just wondering if we're gonna if that's the thing that has value, if we're gonna attach a feedback form to the QA.DAO publication, so as people watch or put in a YouTube video too or whatever, that we can keep getting more feedback. But
yeah, so the wiki survey, it can be a mechanism for that. So that's going to be broadcast
linked
widely. So we've dropped the link into this chat and also sent out with Twitter and, you know, lots of different spaces. So I think the circle reps, including Quasar and others, are going to be, you know, really broadcasting that widely. So we do want the participation from as many people as possible. I don't know if
so just for clarification, to add to this conversation, the wiki survey would be a good venue.
Yes, because you can add your own statements and says, let's do it
Sounds
like
good.
this. And then people can vote on what you just added.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not just like a fixed poll. It's not static, it's dynamic. That's why it's a wiki survey, not just a poll. So yeah, we can share that link again if anyone needs it. But yeah, I you know, how long should this go on in terms of collecting feedback? I don't know if it should be in months. You know, I probably would prefer weeks, you know, something of that nature, just to kind of get some capture of input, you know, certainly at least as input into the next voting round, so we can establish the next experiment.
And for everybody listening on Twitter, I do apologize for my dog barking really loud. Somebody came to the door selling me solar panels, and I was not prepared for that.
Did you buy them?
I did not, unfortunately, and I live in Florida. So it was just it's wrong timing.
I guess the two questions we're asking is who has a seat and how are they elected? And then to follow on from what Alison said, if we want to experiment, then we should only change minimal variables. But I would add that the experiment can be adjusted so that the current circle only has the election adjustment, but I would love to see a second circle spun up that also has cross-pollination between the two circles. So one extra seat from that circle would be on the other circle. And that second circle would be open to more radical experimentation. So who's on that circle would be more up to the community kind of just working it out, and we'll see where that goes. And it could fail miserably, or it could be an amazing experiment. That's how I'd like to see it. So we've got the ordered structure that's already there, follow that through, work out a nice tidy way to make a simplified vote. It could just be using an existing Web 2.2 structure. But we go to a radical experiment on another side with the commitment that the first existing circle will send a member from their body onto that circle, and an additional seat is made to pass back so that there's two people on both circles. That's how I would like to see this experiment expand. And then that gives us the ability to innovate and create a whole new blooming of how things could be, plus keeps the existing experiment going with the option of just changing a few simple variables. We'll stand on that, but that's how I'd like to see it expand.
That's really cool. Anyone have thoughts on that? I certainly, think it's a great way to, run multiple things at the same time and learn.
Sounds like Catalyst might have a white camel model after all.
Nice. Yeah, Chris just turned his camera on. Anyone else want to chime in on Phil's comment? Okay, we got a thumbs up.
I mean, part of the whole problem that we've got going here is there is very little ability to make decision making, and the circle was never designed for this. We still have all this decision making stuff being done. We have a mechanism for decision making. It's proposals in Catalyst in a funding round. So that's why I was in my first comment an hour or two ago, or however long we've been here, was that there's already funded proposals in existence that the call out, we don't have structures to let them form a circle. Not that we need to let anyone form a circle, but if the circle makes a call out to say, if you're a community and you'd like representation on this secondary circle, work out how you're going to send a member to it, and it will rerun on these days. It's a voluntary, it's like the original circle idea, voluntary the first, because they're already funded proposals. It's just working out how to get a member on there. So that's how I'd imagine this would work. And it doesn't have to be a funded proposal, but that's the call out, right? If someone then comes and says, I want to see, we're not a funded proposal yet. Well, we say, okay, let's see. We might have 100 members, but we probably won't, given the size of the active community. It's probably not going to be a massive body, but we'll deal with that kind of in the first meeting and work out what the hell's going on. I don't know. It's an interesting, way forward, I think.
Love it.
It needs organization, sort of direction, and what we call flag bearing or whatever, like someone to put up their hand and say, this is what we're doing.
Love the concept, Phil.
I think that's you, Phil, as the flag bearer.
Yeah.
I'm busy with other things, but yeah.
Yeah, Quasar.
I'm going to say this knowing that it's potentially uncomfortable, or at least it is for me. The community governance oversight proposal that was voted on, I don't necessarily believe that that's not what I intend to be a group that forms for this. And I understand the work that's being done there. However, I don't necessarily know if that's the type of group that you're referring to, Phil or Harris, or anyone that's on that proposal. But I would like to make sure that everyone that doesn't know how I feel about that specifically funded proposal, it's not necessarily what I call legitimate, as in a decision-making body, a group that can make parameter changes or anything like that. We all know how voting works in idea scale. is that itself legitimate? I don't necessarily want to put all my eggs in that basket. So,
but everyone but that group, then maybe.
no, actually, I mean, I'm happy to call out a lot of groups, but I didn't want to, put a. Who's going to make a list?
I would open it up rather than close it down. That's what I'd say.
Yeah,
I'd rather have participation than to say I don't agree with that existing or whatever. So
yeah, and let me say I don't necessarily agree with that group. I don't agree with the fact that it being voted makes it a group that is part of Circle or becomes a functional group. We're still learning. We're still experimenting.
Yeah, and I appreciate that comment, Quasar. And I think there's probably a whole conversation to have around that can't happen here. But I would say that I think that you said community governance oversight was taking decisions as a result of its legitimacy of being voted for. And I don't think anybody would say that that's happening. I don't think community governance oversight is making any decisions.
Beautiful. And that's apparently nobody's making any decisions right now. So we're good, right? Hey.
Well, luckily, only the ADA holders are making decisions at the moment, right?
Right.
They're the ones voting in the catalyst and making decisions. That's how it works.
Well said. Well said.
That's not a bad thing at all, really.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, did you want to close us out with the final comment?
Sure, guys. I'd love for you to look at my GitHub from back in January, putting these tests out there, and I'd like to get these things on chain and maybe just poke around in some of the things I already put in the mill. And yeah, I want to see this this happen, and I'm tired of the banter. It's time for getting some decision makers in and us to come to conclusions and consensus on what we're going to do here. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Chris.
Awesome. All right. Any last words from anyone? Otherwise, I think we've had a good discussion. We certainly can hold more. I think, Quasar, are you holding another Twitter space in the near future? I know there was discussion about it. I just don't know when they are or where they are. How can people find out more?
Well, I will share them around when they happen. I might actually schedule a few. I've been jumping into the daily Cardano over coffee and having a few little, breakout comments about it when I can. Epoch's End is a show that happens at the end of every epoch. Usually jump on there and do a little space. And these are small segments, but now that proposals are in, community proposal assessors are doing their thing. So there'll be some regular spaces, and we'll tap in the Catalyst Circle specific type stuff into each and every one of those as it comes up a little bit naturally. And then there'll be some scheduled that are specific to Circle. And the poll, yeah. Most of you know how to reach me on Discord or Twitter, and I'll start putting those links into Discord, Telegram, Twitter, Reddit, USA Today, New York Times.
Yeah, let's go print. We'll bring it back.
Right.
To print.
Awesome, folks. Thank you so much for participating in this discussion. Certainly lively. I'll capture the chat notes as well and share that with QA Dal for making sure that it's all captured. But really appreciate everyone's time and energy and being here.
Thank you, Harris, and thank you, Quasar.
Thank you, guys.
Especially the work you're doing for the Circle, which we know is on a volunteer basis at this point for the Circle V3. At least, I mean, maybe I shouldn't have opened that can of worms. What I'm trying to say is we appreciate the work that you're doing.
That's a hell of a goodbye.
Oh, that's so not what I meant. I'm sorry, I'm tired. I appreciate the work you're doing is what I was trying to say.
I thank you very much, and volunteer or not, it's a pleasure to be here and do the work. So I love it.
It's super value and appreciated, Quasar and Harris, of course, and everyone who's participating here. So thanks for showing up.
Take care, everyone. Ciao.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.